Wonderful. Well, so my name's Tom. Yes, so I'll get into this. I'm worried that I might have more material than 45 minutes, Richard. So please stop me. There's a couple of slides I won't include at the end, but they might form part of the discussion material. So this is my title. My doctoral thesis had a broader research question, obviously, and that was, what are the practical ecclesiological challenges facing the British Christian community as it engages with Christians from a South Asian Islamic background? And the final title of my doctorate became Longing for Family, Experiences of Converts from a Muslim Background and Challenges Facing the British Christian Community as it Welcomes Them. So the journey to Christ, as I call it, was, and what I'm going to focus on today was really merely one chapter in the whole thesis that will be today's focus. But I felt that you could not possibly understand all that followed in the relationship between church and convert unless one had a fuller understanding of their cultural, religious, and social background in Islam. So beyond the sort of introductory and methodological chapters, my chapter titles followed and had a sense of movement. A chapter on home, which looked at the fundamental background socially, culturally of the believers I interviewed, then the journey, which is really this seminar today, then arrival in the Christian community and what that actually looked like, which I developed a 5-point schema on arrival, and then settling into church and church as family. So along the way at each stage in this sort of journey, I sought to analyze the challenges facing the Christian community. But for the benefit of today's seminar, these will not figure prominently, but I will maybe in our discussion highlight at the end some key questions and challenges that the church has to contend with, and perhaps another seminar engaging fully with the issues post-conversion would be appropriate and suitable. If you'd like to know briefly about me, those are my contact details. I work for the Navigators. That's my phone number if you'd like it. I was a teacher by training for 12 years in the classroom. But my journey, in a sense, with Muslims began in teaching in multicultural inner city areas. But then for nearly 30 years, my wife Judy and I lived in Spark Hill in Birmingham, a densely populated, Islamic area of mainly South Asian heritage in the middle of Birmingham. I pursued an MA in 2005, which I completed, which began this work, an MA in dissertation, and that was a similar theme. And it was the completion of this work which encouraged me to pursue the doctorate, basically. And to my shame, it's taken me 12 years to complete it, which was last December. I am an evangelical, but I would describe myself as a broad evangelical. I actually have Irish Roman Catholic roots, but our churchmanship has involved Anglican, Brethren, and alternative forms of church that might be more in line with something like fresh expressions or emerging church. Briefly on the methodology, I interviewed for the doctorate 28 South Asian Muslim believers in Christ. 15 were born in the UK, but 8 came as young children. So in total, 23. And that was the focus that I wanted, people predominantly born and raised in the UK. And so 23 of the 28, though there were 5 more recent arrivals, 24 were Sunni, 2 Shia, 1 Ahmadiyya, and 1 had mixed Christian Muslim Parents, you can have this, PowerPoint, of course, with all the notes at the bottom that I'm adding to. So you will receive this, I think. I'll pass this on, Richard, to you. The youngest person I interviewed was 21, the oldest 61, with an average age of 38. The newest Christian had only been a Christian 9 months, but the longest was nearly 29 years, with an average about 14 years. So it was, these weren't young, immature believers. These were firmly established by and large in the faith and had persevered through. 26 were baptized, 2 were not. The 2 that weren't, one because of her newness in the faith only, but the other one was a deliberate choice. She was a hijab wearing believer in Jesus who chose to remain within a social and cultural sort of identity. And that was very interesting. You can see there, I mean, singles 12, marrieds 12, 4 were divorced, and 3 of those were as a direct result of becoming followers of Jesus. And at the bottom there, you see how they chose to self-designate. So 22 of them chose to call themselves Christian, of which 16 only use that term, but others preferred titles like follower of Jesus, follower of Isa, Islam in a couple of cases, you use that term, follower of both faiths, one person, and person of the book, one person. In my MA, when I concluded the equivalent chapter in my MA, this was the sort of summary paragraph that I sort of had. Thus, to paint a picture, a young Muslim person distanced from their home and community, meeting and befriending Christians, searching for answers to big questions, open to visiting their places of worship, reading their scriptures, and praying with honesty to God, is most likely to end up becoming a follower of Jesus. That might sound pretty obvious, but when I interviewed the 16 mature believers for my MA, those were my concluding thoughts. And similarly, as I summarize this chapter on their journey to Christ, these were the sorts of things that resonate again. So there was a personal quest, a serious re-engagement with the Holy Scriptures, both actually Bible and Quran, the importance of having Christian friends and relationships, the crisis of life's more difficult circumstances, the very real possibility of some sort of supernatural encounter with God, a greater awareness of the God whose character is love, and of the place and significance of Jesus Christ as more than just a mere prophet. And finally, the importance of a welcoming Christian community. So a similar picture emerges in the doctoral work as was for the MA. And in this chapter, I chose to dialogue with the writings of Louis Rambo, who many of you will know, and his 7-stage integrated model on religious conversion includes context, which for me was more the chapter about the home, their context for coming, then encounter, quest, crisis, interaction, and then commitment and consequences were more the issues that I delved with in later chapters. So, to give you some idea, altogether I had 538 codes through all the data, through the research data. And only 96 of those codes were linked together in a code group called Moving Towards Christ. So that shows you that my thesis was much more broader than just this aspect of conversion. But here, when these 96 codes were linked together, these were the main sort of issues that came out, the personal questioning on the journey to Christ. There were 32 separate codes there, difficult or unusual circumstances on their journey to Christ. I was linking 22 codes there, and so on. And you can read down. These were some of the things that we'll unpack in the next few minutes. And there were clearly push and pull factors here. Those that moved them away from Islam was the ability, for example, to understand the Quran in their own language, because they weren't Arabic speakers, difficulties maybe within their families and local communities, or the wider political and social and national and international events which gave Islam to some degree a poor light. But this in tandem with things which then drew them towards Christ, especially things like the friendship of Christians, the attractive stories of Jesus, and the influence of the Bible generally. And then what for them was the surprising experience of a welcoming Christian community. And so in what follows now, I mainly want you to hear the voices themselves of the individuals as we break down these factors into 5 main areas. Is that okay, guys, so far? So that's a bit of backdrop, and here now we get into the sort of more detailed. Okay, so first there was a personal quest on behalf of the people. Rambo states that quest is the process in which people seek to maximize the meaning and purpose in life. And he argues that in classical psychology of religion literature, converts were often portrayed as passive, whereas in more recent sociological discussions, much more is made of the person being an active agent in the change process, searching for new experiences and new depths of spiritual understanding, leading to transformation, health, well-being, and personal development. So just some tasters here from Azra, who said, I wanted to know the truth of life. I wanted to live a good life. I wanted to live with purpose and know why I'm on the earth. Or Imran. Oh, these, by the way, are all pseudonyms. Okay, these are all pseudonyms I'm using. I search for the truth is really what I would say. I'd always believed in finding the truth at whatever cost. Or Theas, I knew that there was a God, but I had a fear of hell. I did not want to go to hell. So it was in my own interest that I found out who the true God of this planet was. In pursuing their search, interviewees often oscillated between Christianity, Islam, and looking elsewhere. And this was why increasingly it became important to me consider the factor of time in order to allow full agency. Khalid, for example, stressed that making such a decision should not be hurried, but owned and appropriated by the individual. He says, because I am conscious that it is a controversial decision and there may come a time when I might regret it, and I don't want at that time to blame other people for persuading me. So I need to own this decision and be sure that I own it. So, it was a slow decision. Those folks who naturally were coming from a Muslim background, often as they met people, as they met Christians, as they were on this search, would go back and engage seriously with the Quran. But they were often disappointed and expressed disquiet. So Anil said, I read the English version of the Quran through. I don't think I took anything on board, to be honest, as I read it through. There were random inconsistencies, personally, is what I found. And Aisha admitted, what I am reading, it means nothing to me. And Abida agreed with that. But there are at the bottom there, as the folks examined the holy books, there were problems. So I've mentioned about the problem with the Quranic Arabic being not understandable, but equally the biblical texts were initially queried as to whether they were reliable or trustworthy. So Khan presents this problem. He says, I was looking for the Torah, the Zabur, and the Injil. But each time I put those words in the internet or asked somebody, they would tell me it's the Bible. And I would say, no, 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 I don't want the Bible. It's corrupted, it's changed. But for all those interviewed, ultimately, the power of the scriptures to inform, challenge, make clear the message of Jesus and bring light, hope, and peace was consistently reported by the people. And I assure you, this was not necessarily what they expected or wanted. The scriptures, instead of repelling them, drew them towards a greater engagement with the Christian faith. In their personal search, the scriptures were pivotal to the decisions the converts would eventually make. It gave information about Christianity. It introduced them to the person of Jesus Christ, who they found attractive. It also gave awareness of a God somewhat at variance with Islamic theology, one of love as compared with one that was to be feared. And this introduced truth to them, which raised questions about how their own religious background and understanding. Somehow they found the words appealing and attractive in a way that the Arabic Quran, which few could understand, as I explained, or its English translations failed to offer. From their perspective, the words of the Bible brought light. It had the power to transform their thinking and belief systems. It was interesting to me that what was absent was significant by its absence is the fact that few recorded the preaching of the Bible as influential, though this is seen as normative within the Christian world. Although some read the Bible alone and others would have heard it read and preached when attending church, the majority were simply introduced to it through a Christian friend. And so by allowing a person to travel at their own speed in their quest for truth, this was a key factor which the data uncovered. And as Rambo explains, the motivational factors involved in the quest are complex, but interviewees were active in their own pursuit of truth, some demonstrating a clearer hunger and passion to discover new meanings for themselves than others. Reluctance and hesitancy played their part alongside attraction and desire. Given the enormity and consequences of the decision, it is not surprising that there was hesitancy on their part. Nevertheless, the data pointed to a determined desire to pursue the evidence they were uncovering, and thus they were very much active agents in the conversion process. The second main theme we come to is Christian friendships and relationships. So if the first was the personal quest, this was the personal relationship. So again, just some tasters from Aisha. My best friend was a Christian from the age of 11, and she was part of the church that I'm now part of. Or Millie, she was very supportive, you know, with my dad passing away. We would sit and have long chats about things. And one day I just sort of asked her, you know, what she believed, and she shared with me what she believed. I'll come back to Millie in a moment. Azra, I like that about her. She's always stayed in touch. She's never judged me. She supported me all the way through. So these ideas of presence, personal, practical support, honest sharing, answering questions. Coming to Millie, it was interesting because she said about her friend, I found that actually she struggled really to kind of explain things to me. But friendship meant more to Millie than the skill by which her friend could share the Christian faith. So that was, answering questions and general sensitivity and not rushing. It was interesting that these friends came from all sorts of backgrounds. So Hina and Abida and Alio discovered that a family member was a Christian they hadn't known before. Rachel, in her case, her teacher became her friend when she had to leave home. And this happened with Yaz as well. Christians offered Yaz hospitality and friendship when she needed to get away from her home situation. And then in a couple of people, at least Khalid and Anil, the opposite sex were very important in their relationship of how they actually became um, um, followers of Jesus. In Khalid's case, he was married to a Christian for 10 or more years before he really engaged seriously with Christianity. And in Anil's case, he's now married to the girl that was his girlfriend at the time. Amir was taken to church by a social worker friend. So in all cases, there was a great deal of sensitivity. Imran says of some of his friends, I suspect that they prayed for me, and they were praying. They didn't push Christ on us, they just probably lived their lives as an example. In Rambo's psychological theory of conversion, having Christians as positive examples is the encounter phase. The encounter stage involves the contact between the potential convert and the advocate and takes place in a particular setting. There are many factors that influence this complex relationship and its outcome, and it's a dynamic interplay that exists. Needs on both sides are met in these relationships. Language plays a role in strategizing, maneuvering, engaging in mutual interaction. For example, in Ali O's case, he was determined to win back his grandmother to Islam. And Rambo makes the point that missionary strategy exists along a continuum, which with some groups actively and aggressively seeking recruitment and converts, while others are much more passive in their approach. And in fairness here, both Islam and Christianity are faiths that have a missionary mandate. So it was good to hear you, Richard, at the beginning saying, we need to analyze conversion to Islam as well. Both were possible in these relationships, but in the context of the relationships that were developed, it might have been possible for the Christians to have been persuaded to become Muslims. But whatever the strategy, the encounter occurs within a dynamic force field in which both advocate and convert are generally active agents. Interestingly enough, in sociological terms, one theory known as social influence theory argues that persons will form social attachments with people who are already members of a group. So we know that many, many Muslim people have very, very strong attachments with their own family, with their own community, with their own religion. But if these attachments become weak in some way, then these folks will be open to new attachments and may weaken the attachment with the original group. William Bainbridge argues that individuals who lack these ties to conformity will be free to experiment with novel alternatives. And basically, whilst it's certain that having friendships with Christians allowed for those interviewed to begin to form these new attachments, my own conclusion was that in most of the cases I interviewed, the folks had strong attachments to the Muslim community they come from and their family, but also develop strong attachments with these Christian friends and relationships. Bainbridge himself makes clear that the sociologist must leave out the divine half of the equation when examining the phenomenon of conversion. He says social science has no tool to research the supernatural, and it must leave to theologians an analysis of how deity chooses to interact with humanity. But you see, theologically, from an evangelical perspective at least, human beings are precisely those agents of the deity. Not only are individuals called to follow Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, but they are also sent out by him into the world to act as agents of blessing and change. And in this process, calling others to follow Christ in the same way. And this commission is not simply for specialist experts or those who've been employed as ministers of Christian religion and missionaries, but it's for all believers in Jesus Christ. So while some evidence from the data accepts that the participants did meet missionaries and other Christians in leadership positions, for the majority, the friendships developed were with ordinary Christians, and these were not seen as random chance encounters, but as God working his purposes out for their lives through meeting, befriending, and engaging with agents of God's activity on earth. Okay, so the significance of Christian friendships and relationships. I think I'll just move on to the third point. I hope you don't mind. I'm not particularly allowing for interruption at this point, but I'm sure we'll have time if I get through it for lots of questions. So I'll just persevere into the third main area, which was the crisis of life circumstances. And here, you can see some tasters here. Death in the family. Prissy, her father, mother, and brother literally all died within a few weeks of one another. And she states there she was obviously in a state of stress, lots of anxiety, also loneliness, but she was very angry with God as well. I actually blamed him for everything. I won't mention these people, but at least two folks reported sexual abuse within the family. These were dark days for these individuals. Incredibly, about a quarter of my entire data set experienced a period of running away from home. Whatever the crisis was, these folks there, 25%, at some point moved away from home because of dysfunctionality within their family. Azra was particularly interesting in that she suffered some very demonic and dark depression, illness for several years before she became a follower of Jesus. And she was contemplating suicide at the very point of her making a decision to follow Christ. And then finally, unhappy marriages. I mean, I'm illustrating with these tasters of what the sort of crises were. In Yasmin's case, you know, I knew that he was having an affair. It was so difficult because I was expected to be this good Muslim wife and turn a blind eye, etc., etc. So Rambo describes the crisis as maybe being religious, political, psychologically, or cultural. During the crisis, myths, rituals, symbols, goals, and standards cease to function well for the individual or culture. Such a crisis creates great disorientation in the individual's life. And Rambo discusses the difference between what he calls deficiency motivation, implying a breakdown or debility on the part of the person, which ends up generating change on the basis of fear, loneliness, and depression. This he compares with fulfillment motivation, which has a much more positive reason for change. Some people are spiritual questers, which we've already seen, always growing, learning, developing, maturing. So rather than passive victims of aggressive advocates, these people are actively searching for new options, stimulation, ideas. And to put it briefly, I felt that whilst in these cases there might be an element of truth with what Rambo calls the deficiency motivation sphere, um, it doesn't mean that within those cases this was the only motivation. Rambo's fulfillment motivation, the growth, learning, developing, and maturing, which is motivated by more active agents searching for new options, stimulations, were yet to be expressed by those quoted. Fulfillment as a theme, the end result of the conversion process, was a realization for all interviewed. So rather than separating deficiency motivation from fulfillment motivation, perhaps it would be better to see them as two sides of the same coin working together. I come next, and there's only two main titles here left. I come next to the supernatural encounter with God as a reality. And Rambo himself says psychological understanding is merely a human attempt to comprehend what is ultimately, to the person of faith, an encounter between a majestic and mysterious God and a person who is a being with vast potential, perversity, and extraordinary complexity. Scientific psychology is a human discipline which can only attempt to use theories to understand a phenomenon that is beyond the scope of human comprehension. And here you see what, at one degree or another, all of my people found that I interviewed. They discovered God, a loving father. I think that was what Hina Asher said. I think number one was hearing of God as a father. I think that was quite a big thing for me. It's not something I've ever heard before. This was what was intrinsic across the data. This idea of God as a loving father in Christianity was unique to many. And Khalid expressed it really well. The word relationship entered my vocabulary when I became a Christian. But not only thinking about God as Father was more significant, instead of fearing God or fearing Allah, which was very significant for many of them, they also discovered Jesus as more than a mere prophet. Galilei said, I started to like the stories of the life of Jesus and the way he lived, the way he helped people, and especially his sacrifice for us, what he did for us. Before converting to Christianity, I would have feared the consequences of converting. I decided that the personality of Jesus was more important to me than my relationship, social pressure, and the common people. Right throughout the data set, time and time again, people talked about this relationship with God as a loving father and Jesus as somebody special and more than a mere prophet. Azra, for example, said this: nothing would have stopped me. As soon as Jesus turned up, he showed me the truth. I was like that person who found the treasure and, sold everything. And Yasmin too communicates Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And if you know the truth will set you free. And so I sensed that and I felt that. And you know, in your whole being, almost your inner being, I knew that this was not Allah, this was not Muhammad. Though an interesting warning from Esther here, where she said, but we didn't become Christians to become white and westernized. That's a theme that emerged further on in my thesis. We just became Christians because we needed Jesus and we changed. And I could go on with Theas or Millie. Theas said, I was touched, something erupted inside me, and I found this Jesus quite extraordinary. And Millie just said, just reading about the person of Jesus, who he was, who he is, found it really amazing. So, as well as that aspect of a kind of theological supernatural encounter with God, discovering Jesus as a loving father, Jesus as more than a mere prophet and a loving father, there were also these dreams, visions, and audible voices that the people reported. Now, Jazz himself says there, most just by way of an introduction, Jazz, one of the people I interviewed, most Muslims become a Christian through a supernatural experience, not just through someone telling them. They have to meet God. And you can see there that 33% of my entire data set, from Chrissy through to Esther, spoke of dreams, of visions of Jesus, of audible voices. And then if you add to that Azra's healing, which is also Ali O and Abida at the bottom, then you get an even higher percentage of people who've experienced God in a very real and a very tangible and a supernatural way. I'd like to just share with you the story that Chrissy related to me in particular. She related the dream she had, which was significant in her own journey to Christ. She was struggling to come to terms with bereavement in her own family, was angry with God, and was on the point of reneging all faith. She saw in the dream an Arab man in white shining clothes. In the dream, this man took Chrissy to a garden. Here she saw herself as a 5-year-old in the garden, along with some other children playing. She admitted it was a strange, surreal experience. She then recounts how this man takes her in the dream to a cave, which seemed to her eerie, ominous, and uncomfortable. Returning to the garden, the man had his hands held out in two directions, one going to the garden and one going to the other place, the cave. So she concluded, I was meant to make some sort of decision at the end of this experience. And whilst disorientated and feeling scared, she made clear that it was a very vivid, clear dream. Even today, she said, I can still remember. I can even smell something of it, the flowers. I can remember the garden, the beautiful white flowers. And so she went on. What convinced her, though, was what happened next. On the same day, wandering into a building in one of our big cities, not knowing it was actually a church, she recalled on the wall seeing a painting. I saw this painting of Jesus Christ before he was just about to be bound and chained and crucified. And the man in the painting was the same man that I had seen 24 hours before at night. And I thought, oh, it was Jesus Christ. So it wasn't, Abu Bakr or a Sufi saint, you see, because he was Arab looking. I could have assumed it could have been anyone from Islam. God made sure that I knew it was Jesus Christ. Now that story, I could relate Gulalai's story. I could relate Khan's dream set in a mosque or vision, set in a mosque. He was an imam preparing to become an imam 3 times in 2004, 2007, 2010. He received the identical dream. These are all in the notes, which if you receive the PowerPoint, they'll all be at the bottom. I hope it works like that. So you can read about these dreams yourself and these figures and so on. Let me just go on. So just the significance of these sort of supernatural encounters with God as a reality. I've already mentioned Azra's dramatic healing. I don't think I will go more about that, but these were significant. I could go on a lot more about these dreams, visions, audible voices, healings, but I'll just go to the final sort of slide here. Interestingly, if we go back to the beginning, this was a less significant factor than some of the other factors I've already described. But the welcoming Christian community was certainly an important factor. It was the gathered community. Often the introductions were made by their Christian friends, which we've already discussed. It wasn't just the formal Sunday services, it was whenever the Christians gathered in groups, such as social events. For several of the people I interviewed, they actually had a sort of Roman Catholic teaching upbringing in education. So some sort of Christian formal education played a part here. And there was just a natural inquisitive nature. Jarvid says, I went into church. I had no intention to be a Christian, to convert to Christian and looking. I was just looking at how they pray and how they do their services, just to know. And buildings themselves were often attractive places, traditional churches. So Rita found herself running in and out of church buildings when she was younger, but all the time, whenever this happened, these folks would see Christians relating to one another. It was the difference in the lifestyle. Though, to be honest, it was often confusing and disturbing. So Anil, who first went to an Assemblies of God church, described it as insane and mental. There was no way I was going to go back there. um, and with Khan, it was very interesting with Khan and Micah. He was the guy that was going to become an imam, but when he'd had these dreams, he knew very little about Christianity, very little about church. So they were interested in Christ and the difference he might make to their lives, but they were somewhat at the mercy of their friends or circumstances as to where they visited. So Khan, in pursuit of the meaning of the dream he experienced, attended Mormon, Roman Catholic, Anglican churches because he said, I would go to any church, anything would come my way. The answer I was looking for, to be honest, was Jesus in the Bible. But the generosity of spirit and non-pressurizing, gentle responses were attractive to Khan at this stage of his journey. They didn't tell me like, okay, you must stay here or we're the right ones. They would sit with me and ask questions and explain to me, then say, okay, bye-bye, bless you. That sort of relationship. And Micah was very interesting because she was used the internet and she was put in touch with a Roman Catholic church and she met the priest privately. And in the interview, she described a conversation to a Catholic priest. She expressed her wish to know about the Holy Spirit, about women's rights in Christianity. This was a big deal for Micah, and her desire for less extremism in religion. And he in turn offered her a New Testament, encouraged her to read it and stop whenever she felt compelled. So she says, I started from the Gospel of Matthew and I stopped at the Lord's Prayer because it was the first time I knew what I was praying for. Each and every word I understood, and that inspired me. I stopped there and went back and I said, I like this. And he said, okay, let's recite it together. And we did that together. This marked the beginning of Micah's experience of church. The generosity of that priest was such that when Micah asked him, she was quite a feminist, was Micah. She asked him, where are the women at the front of this church? I can arrange flowers in the mosque. Where are the women at the front? The generosity of the priest was such that he said, well, we don't have too many women at the front in our Catholic church, but our brothers and sisters up the road in the Anglican community do have. So he introduced her to the local Anglican priest, and there was a woman curate there. Anyway, that's enough. I'm going on. I'm rabbiting on. So the welcoming Christian community. So finally, factors working together. The 5 factors we've examined so far: the self-quest, Christian relationships and friendship, circumstances of life, in touch with a spiritual reality, welcoming, combined to empower the individuals to want change. For any one individual, 1 or 2 of the factors may appear more significant than others. Yet across the entire sample, all 5 were present or are present to various degrees. And I use Anil finally just to illustrate this combination of the factors. Anil appeared the most rational of all those I interviewed. He was a science teacher. He looked for empirical evidence. He examined the scriptures. He observed church life. In fact, if I recall rightly, he was a member, not a member officially, but was part of 3 different churches as he explored this his Christianity. He discussed with Christians and Muslim leaders alike. He re-examined his own religious roots. Emotionalism would not easily sway Anil. As he admitted himself, I'm more of an empirical thinker, so I needed definitions and I needed structured thinking in a way, and explanations that link and make sense and are the best theory possible. That's the way my mind works. Nevertheless, resolution of his decision occurred in a surprising way. Attending church one Sunday, he learned that there would be no sermon. The minister invited the congregation to sit down, close your eyes, and just let God in and ask him what he wants to ask of you. And listen to what he has to say. Dutifully obeying, Anil explained, I am not going to think anymore. I want you to do all the thinking for me. And I said, God, wherever you are, whoever you are, just tell me, show me what it is you want me to see, and bring me out of this rut. What followed was an image of himself in clear blue water, following a light, alternating with him on a dried out beach. For him, the message was clear. There wasn't like any confusion with it at all. He explained, if you move forward, you're going to be in that pure, clean blue water. So just trust it. But if you turn back, you're going to start drying out again. And what would you rather do? And that was it. That was the message that breached my thinking. That was what I'm going to do. I'm going to pursue Christianity. And at that point, I wouldn't have necessarily called myself a Christian, but that was the turning point of saying, I need to find out as much as I can about this. So as I conclude the implications for Christians and the Christian community, looking at the factors in their movement to Christ, Christianity and church. What then does this chapter identify as the practical ecclesiological challenge for the British Christian community as it engages with new converts from a South Asian Islamic background? The fact that conversion of this nature is happening and growing suggests that the church should not only expect it, but be prepared for it. It should be aware of some of the factors described in the process so that it should not be surprised by experiences described which are unfamiliar to its own. The church should recognize that Muslims are asking deep questions and may venture into churches or seek out Christian people for answers. It should listen well to the stories and questions, giving time and energy, for this not only validates the individual, but develops stronger relationships at this point. It should recognize the vital role the scriptures play, but scripture shared as friends in relationship rather than with a heavy emphasis on preaching. There should be an openness to and acceptance of the supernatural experiences as real and valid, a challenge to the Western Church's rational and enlightenment assumptions. Essential is the growing awareness in the conversion process of the complex lives and challenges the new believers face in negotiating their new identity, whilst living with the reality of an old identity, especially in relationship to their blood kin. Above all, being a welcoming church, responding with sensitivity and love to what they are seeing and hearing. Once again, I conclude, the onus lies with the leaders to know and understand these things better and to engage with them fully so that new directions and priorities can be set. However, the stories reveal so much of the part that ordinary Christians play in relationship with Muslim friends, and this reality cannot be understated.